Hello, welcome to the Sustain Dane Summit 2020, our second session of the day. Really excited about this panel. We have some incredible leaders in our community talking about the intersection of climate, health, and equity. As you join, please add your name to the chat. Say hello. If you're part of an organization, you can add that. Share some information about what you're doing right now in the climate sphere, and the health and the equity sphere, and just use that chat as a place for conversation to happen. Share your questions and reflect on what we're hearing today. I would like to thank all of our partners, our sponsors, and our members that make this summit possible and make all the good work of Sustain Dane possible. We have developed a directory that you'll find in the chat if you'd like to learn more about them. Let's just really focus on supporting each other, both the organizations and the individuals, as well as supporting organizations that value sustainability. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator today, Robin Lisowski from Slipstream, and move into our great panel this morning. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to our local leaders panel. Today we're going to discuss the intersection of climate, health, and equity, and our panelists will share how their work is shaping a thriving and resilient community for all in the decade ahead. If you were with us this morning, you already heard Claire recognize that holistic sustainability is about a healthy environment, social well-being, and a just economy, and people are really at the center of creating a sustainable community. As we see in the work of Project Drawdown, climate and social systems are profoundly connected, and those connections open up solutions that are often overlooked. Some initiatives designed primarily to ensure rights and equality can have cascading benefits for climate change mitigation. We have an amazing panel today, including Justice Castañeda, the Executive Director of Commonwealth Development, Lisa Peyton-Caire, the CEO and President of the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness, James Edward Mills, writer and producer and creator of the Joy Trip Project, Chef Tory Miller from the Deja Food Restaurant Group. Justice, would you please take a few minutes to introduce and describe your current work for everybody?
Yes, good morning. It's so great and humbled to be here with you all. It's I think one thing we kind of learned this year from not having our festivals and not being able to get outside, I always feel like as someone who's from Madison, that there's nothing like Madison in the summer. You know what I'm saying? Like, we know how to do summer, because so I do miss everybody. So it's so humble to be here. My name is Justice. I'm I always say the friendly local Chicano Marine veteran here, hanging out in Madison. I'm a Madison native. I started my academic career right over here at Red Caboose Daycare Child Care Center on Willie Street. I advanced out of kindergarten in Miss Fletcher's kindergarten class at Mendota Elementary School. And by the grace of God, somehow I graduated from Madison East High School. I work here at Commonwealth Development, which is a very old community development organization. We do a lot of work in the area of community development, but the three big areas are housing, healthy housing for people, for human beings, and we do equitable economic development, really supporting our small business and our local economy. And then we also do a lot of work around sustainable land use, and we're really thinking about what that means. So that's who we are, and we're over here. So again, it's really great to see everybody. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Lisa, will you describe your current work for us?
Yes, and as Justice said, it's really wonderful to be here. I want to thank Sustain Dane, which, as you know, is one of my favorite nonprofits in the Dane County and in Wisconsin overall. As a former proud board member, it's always wonderful when I get invited back to share and be a part of this wonderful annual event. This is not my first and won't be my last. And congratulations for you all for taking this virtual. It's an honor to be here. I am the founder, CEO, and president of the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness. We are a small but growing and mighty nonprofit organization based here in Dane County, whose work is really spreading across our state. We exist for the purpose of empowering a generation of well Black women, and that work has taken on significant meaning over the last 9 years of our work here as I established this organization with a committed board and cadre of Black women across our city and increasingly our state, as we faced the gravest and deepest and most persistent racial health disparities here in the state of Wisconsin. We know that Black women in the state of Wisconsin face incredible health and birth disparities. We lead the nation in racial health disparities here, as well as racial birth disparities, with the highest in the nation Black infant mortality rate, a very unacceptable maternal mortality rate, and all of that coupled in a backdrop of what Justice alluded to, is social and economic inequities that have really been gaping for a very long time in our state. So our focus on elevating and advancing Black women's health has really been a necessary addition to the many, many priorities in our states. It's been a neglected priority, and we're proud to lead work and grow work that is serving over 5,000 women in Dane County directly each year through education, advocacy, support services, and another critical piece of our work in eliminating health disparities is doing systems level work with our health system partners and other sectors who really shape the ecosystem that we live, work, and play in our communities. So we exist to energize, mobilize, and support Black women to transform their lives. And it's an honor to talk about this work today, and I'll share more, I'm sure, as we ask questions later.
Thank you. James, will you tell us about your current work?
You bet. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be on this very auspicious panel. As it happens, though, I'm out of Madison at the moment. I'm actually in Washington, D.C. Much of the work that I do is on the issues of public land management, but also, perhaps most importantly, racial and social justice issues, where it comes to not only the management of our natural resources, but also the access to wild and scenic places as a means of health and wellness. As it happens, I'm a journalist and an independent media producer. And one of the things that I focus on almost exclusively is the disparities of access to our natural spaces. And I do what I can to not only report on and tell stories about people of color and other marginalized communities who have limited access to the outdoors, but also perhaps most importantly, how we can reduce those barriers and ultimately increase access to public land. I write a lot about what people do, but I also do what I can to either create or generate media around these issues, everything from how we can do a better job of exposing people in urban areas to the natural settings around them, as well as being able to perhaps pursue careers in either outdoor recreation or environmental conservation, or in higher echelon careers in things like forest and national park management. So I'm really happy to be a part of this panel, and I look forward to not only contributing, but learning from each of my fellow panelists. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you, James. Chef Tory, will you tell the audience about your current work, please?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here in our closed down dining room. And I when I think about like my current work, it's kind of like surviving. But you know, the thing that we've always done and what we've continued to do is you know, try to make the best food that we possibly can by supporting our local farmers and buying everything that we can locally, supporting immigrant farmers and minority and women farmers is a big thing for us, like, and next generation farmers. That's like kind of been my mission since coming to Madison. I grew up in Racine. I was born in Korea, and I was adopted into a family in Racine, and you know, went to New York and came back, and kind of you know, and coming into Madison, you know, learning about L'Etoile and starting working here originally, and seeing all the farmers and making all the connections and all that stuff. It really continues to be the life work of this restaurant, and it's beyond, you know, what I do. And now it's kind of, I'm more of like the old guy in Madison now. So like I kind of try to bring everybody along, try to, like the whole rising tide raises all ships sort of a thing. But it's also important to me that, people know that being a cook and all that stuff is kind of secondary to what we do. It's more about being educators and supportive of the community and trying to do all these things outside of what we do in the kitchens. It's been the hardest part of the pandemic for us, as restaurants in general. But for us in particular, philanthropy has been a big part of, who we are and our identity and our community here. But it's really just like, how do we continue to pay our own bills, and how do we continue to, keep people employed and that sort of thing. And at the same time, continue writing checks to farmers. And that's been a big challenge for my current work, but, we're excited to, usher in the next era of restaurants and continue educating people even more now. I think now that the mics are on the importance of buying locally, supporting small family farms, and the proper diet for your health, overall mental health, and wellness and stuff like that. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm so excited to be a part of this panel, and like James said, hopefully learn and through great conversation, be a part of something. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. See, rockstar panel. Let's get rolling with individual questions. Lisa, the Foundation for Black Women's Wellness is leading an important initiative to create a policy blueprint for Black women's wellness. Will you please tell us about it?
Yeah, so we've been doing the work of really putting Black women's health on the community radar as a public health priority, as a community imperative, and that evolution of this work that we've done, largely starting as a grassroots movement that's really mobilized Black women to find their voice, to improve their health, but also be developed in their capacity as advocates and leaders. We're graduating to that next level of really realizing that we have to impact where policies are made, because it's policy that affects all of these facets that we've talked about in terms of disparity and inequities. And we're learning this arena. I'm not a policy expert. I didn't come up through the policy sector, but we have we've learned the necessity that learning to enter new spaces and places is critical if we are going to shape and reform the way Black women's health looks in the state of Wisconsin. So one of the key things that drives our work is listening to Black women. All that we create, all that we do, our programming, our priorities each year, the partnerships we engage in are really shaped and determined by what Black women tell us they need, what issues are impacting our lives most deeply around education, economics, all of those pieces that impact quality of life, quality of health. And we realize that we need an agenda. There is no policy agenda. There is no document or no effort that we've found in the history of Wisconsin politics, despite the grave nature of the disparities that Black women's health faces. There's no document or effort that has attempted to chart a course or a path forward on how we solve and turn this issue around. And so we decided that we will do it. And we'll learn along the way, and we'll enlist great partners and great experts to help us shape what will be a living policy blueprint. And living means we're starting by interviewing Black women again. That's a constant part of our process, and asking critical questions around those things that matter most to them. And we will shape a 10-point plan, at minimum a 10-point plan, that really looks holistically and comprehensively across all of those social and structural pieces that we know impact health. So not just health access, education access, economic opportunity, criminal justice reform, all those pieces that really shape family well-being, family sustainability. And it will be such that the voices of women will not only inform how we shape this policy blueprint, but you'll be able to hear these voices through an audio-powered policy platform on our website that we'll then use to engage our decision makers and our legislators, who we already have good relationships with, but we want to go deeper, and we want to give them something to respond to that can really shape our state's priorities over the next the next budget cycle, and over the next decade. And we see this as a starting point. It's something that will be renewed and refreshed each year and give us some markers, some measurable benchmarks so that we can show how our state is taking accountability for really changing the landscape of health in our state and disrupting those disparities that we continue to talk about year after year after year. And that's an unacceptable pattern that we are hoping to break. So we're also coupled with that as we develop this policy blueprint, are launching the Well Black Woman Institute. And we were very fortunate recently to receive a $1 million WPP, a Wisconsin Partnership Program grant to build this institute and to launch it and implement it over the next 5 years as a health equity training ground that will prepare Black women to be advocates and influencers around shaping health policy, practice, and also addressing inequities in their communities and creating those solutions and pushing at the tables of influence, setting their own tables of influence. And that will be an initiative that impacts Black women in Dane, Milwaukee, Rock counties for starters. So we're really intentionally moving statewide in this effort. It's a big step for us, but a necessary step in really moving the needle forward on Black women's health.
Lisa, you said that listening is key to all of this. As you've heard and collected stories for this and other initiatives, is there a story in particular that motivates you day to day?
You know, there are so many stories. There are so many women who I can name to you. And I started writing their names down: Mary, Felicia, Christine, Jackie, Carmela, Gloria, and so many others who are women who've struggled with chronic illness, who struggled with systemic barriers, who struggled with inequities, who are fighting systems to keep their families intact, to make a living wage, who've created efforts and organizations and offshoots of solutions in their community. So it's those women's lives that we know intimately, their stories that unfold as they are working with us and as a part of our organization to improve their health, to strengthen their family's health, and then to consider ways that they can lead and create change with us and beyond us. So those are the stories that we're surrounded by in real time every day, real women who populate this office with me, and not so much lately with COVID, but who are in this work together with us. But it's primarily, Robin, the story of my mother, Roberta Peyton. This is a story I tell, as I speak throughout the year and everywhere. It was losing my mother in 2006 to congestive heart failure at the age of 64, and countless women in my immediate family and community whose lives followed the same trajectory after living their lives in service to family and community, working hard, sacrificing, being good citizens, and experiencing barriers at every turn that really fuels me ahead in this work and reminds me of what our why is on a daily basis, that we are really building a new world, a new paradigm where Black women are powerful and in a leadership position to shape their destiny and not at the whim of systems who are still catching up to what we need. And so we're mobilized and inspired by those real women's stories every day. And as I often say, as I feel my mother on this side, my grandmother on this side, and all the women surrounding us, and together we propel this work forward. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing with much to do ahead.
Thank you for sharing that beautiful story, Lisa.
And that's it, right? We're all done now. We don't have anyone else has to speak. We got it. I feel energized already. We're ready to
Lisa
rock.
did your homework. Tory, your restaurants are known for locally sourcing ingredients, which is part of climate mitigation for reducing transportation. And as we see in Project Drawdown, a plant-rich diet and managing food waste have even larger impacts. How has your commitment to sustainability and the difficulties of this pandemic evolved your restaurant operations over time? And what values have been guiding your decisions about that?
I mean, I think with the pandemic, pre-pandemic, it was the thing that made sense. It was the thing that to me, You know, I came into this as a chef first, you know, and when you're young and you're just like trying to make good food and you're in a different community and stuff like that, like I was just like, well, I just got to find the best tasting food. Obviously, to me, that meant going to farmers and finding that and having a restaurant background to support that. And, you know, that was like my first goal. But then when you go out to the Dane County Farmers Market and you see, you know, all of the farmers out there, like it's the biggest producer only market in the country. And getting to actually connect with the growers and all that stuff, like that's what kind of hooked me into it. But then once you get into those stories and once you understand, like, yeah, this is how these people survive, this is how I survive, how I support my family now, all of those things, like that's when it just became like, this is just what we do now. We don't, you know, just call and have one semi truck drop off our you know, produce, our meat, our cheese, our dairy, our paper products, our chemicals all in one shot, which is convenient. And and why the systems I think have been built that way for restaurants for so long is because restaurants don't make any money. Um, that's a newsflash, by the way. You heard that here, just in case people thought that we would just make all the money. Restaurants don't make any money in the first place. So the more farmers you deal with, like I have over 200 farmers and producers that we talk to weekly, and in doing that, like that's I have to have staff and have to have chefs. Like we split up the workload, so like everyone has their own accounts, and we all like call different farmers and we order different foods and connect with everyone. And all of those conversations, I don't know if you know farmers at all, but if you ever talk to them, they can talk for a while. I don't know if they're like used to just like talking to the plants or the chickens or the cows or whatever, but when they get the human contact, they will talk for a really long time about random stuff. So it's not just a 1 minute conversation like, hey, I need to order 100 pounds of carrots. It's kind of like more than that. So that commitment obviously goes, it just becomes commonplace. Like it's part of our business plan. We understand like that's how much it costs to do it. With the pandemic, it's been very difficult, obviously, to our menus have shrunk. L'Etoile hasn't been open as a dine-in restaurant as we were since March, and we still don't have any real plans to do that. As you know, it doesn't really, you know, make sense to put people in danger that way. But all of our dining rooms are closed right now. But it's one of those things where when you go from being able to spend thousands and thousands and you know, like our bottom, like our the checks that we write every week to farmers that go directly to them, like that's part of the pride of our business, you know. And what we're doing now, it's kind of like, well, we need a certain amount of like ground beef and like, you know, a certain amount of produce and all of that stuff, but it definitely has shrunk in a very real way of the work that we can do. And also like economically, and I know I'm not calling anybody out across Madison, but it's like everyone in town, you know, that was once like, oh, I buy local this, I buy local that, I support these farmers and do this and that. You know, we can't, you see people falling off, you know, and you see that effect that has on farmers. And not only that, you know, like not being able to have the farmers market, which was a major part of business, not just restaurant business, but just downtown economically, like all of the visitors that would come every year to go to the Dane County Farmers Market, wander around the square and eat cheese curds and donuts or whatever, they just weren't there, you know. And now, so the farmers are out there trying to have the drive around markets and, you know, the social distance marketing and stuff like that, but it's just not the same. And, you know, I think like that's been part of my work is still just trying to support that and still just trying to support farmers in every single way that we can. I think that plant-based diets, you know, and trying to educate people on like what the real cost of food. I think the thing that Lisa said and the word that Lisa said and the things that people, one of the things that strikes me this entire year is access. And I think that stems like the education of like why eating, you know, locally produced food and farm raised food is important, but also why, you know, like the access to it. A lot of people think, oh yeah, like I can just go to the grocery store and, you know, I can buy all the fresh food I want. But And yes, you can. Like if you're in Madison, you can drive if you can. But if you can't drive, if you have to take the bus to go to the grocery store, you know how much of a pain that is to like bring your food home. You can't just like drive out, take the bus out to the farmer's market and wander around and get a whole bunch of food for your family. And I think the thing that's hard is like when access to non-fresh foods and to fast foods is easier and cheaper and so prevalent in so many different neighborhoods, and access to fresh food and plant-based foods and all that stuff is it's for a specific amount of people right now in our society. And I think like that's been the hard thing for me is, recognizing that restaurants are a luxury business. We're in the business of luxury, and growing up in Racine, like that was a luxury for me to go out, and we would go out to get pizza. Shout out Wells Brothers Pizza in Racine. But like, we would go out to get pizza, and like that was it. Like, and that would be like the whole family, like cousins and aunts and uncles and everything. And we'd get like 4 pizzas. And so like I understand, like what I do, but then I also understand the responsibility of not just, being like, yeah, we at the most expensive place in town. Like I'm and not every chance I get, just recognizing that I wouldn't have this if I didn't have farmers, if I didn't have growers, if I didn't have people that would provide this food for us. And it's a duty and a responsibility, I think, to chefs to be able to say like, hey, this is where this comes from. This is why you should support them. This is why you should eat this way. And that's kind of the continual work of what we do here.
Tory, taking stock of this year, what do you think is going to be better on the other side of 2020?
Woo! Oh man.
One thing.
First thing, no Donald Trump. I can say that. That's like the best thing about my whole life right now is thinking about 2021, not having to listen to that guy. And the biggest thing, like when and not to go off on that, but like I really wish that media would just shut his mic off as soon as President Biden's in office, and just let that guy fade off for a little bit, because we've had enough. And I think as far as industry, the biggest goal for me in 2021 is to get chefs and restaurant workers, hospitality workers, to recognize the value that they have. And to recognize that, because like I said earlier, it's like, just because historically we've never made money. And like even my grandpa, when I was a kid, he had a restaurant business, and it's still there. It's called the Park Inn. They sold it when I was 16, but it's still in Racine. And when I was growing up, he would always say, he's like, yeah, restaurant business way to take a whole lot of money and maybe make a little bit. And it was the same with farming, because we also grew up on a farm, and I used to joke around saying we were dirt farmers. But we grew hay, and I was like, why do we grow food that we can't eat? But like that was the thing that we did back then. And I think like on the other side of 2021, I would really like to, not just to like have chefs go back to not the status quo of like, we work 24/7, 8 days a week, I'm off on Sundays. Like you're not cramming, like it used to be the thing. It's like, oh, well, I work sun up to sundown. Maybe I see my family, maybe I don't, that sort of thing. Like I really want to, hopefully help this industry, heal, but also like not heal in a negative way, so like not glorifying, alcoholism, drug use, partying, that sort of stuff. I hope that we've all realized like that's not a good look, and it's not sustainable. And I think like that's the big thing for me is like right now, it's not great that our restaurants aren't open, but it is great that I get to go home and read to my kids every night. I get to cook food at home sometimes, a lot more than I used to, and spending time with the family and stuff like that, I think is really important.
Thank you. Doubly edged. Justice, Commonwealth Development provides affordable and low-income housing as a major part of its work. What is the state of housing in the Madison region right now, and what do you think it looks like in the next decade?
I'm just very humbled just to be here. I'm just listening to these stories, and I'm sitting here. I'm just kind of tripping out. You know what I'm saying? Like I think about this a lot. I'll answer that question in a second. I just want to real quick just take a second to absorb the two folks I just heard from and everything they just said. Just because I hope that I think sometimes people hear us, but they don't always listen. And I really listening to Lisa talk a little bit about that about listening and what that really means, right? And to Tory and everything he's saying about our food and the systems and the stuff that goes into our body, and just really thinking about all that stuff is kind of the architecture of love, right? And what that means, and just thinking about moving forward. Like, I ain't trying to go back, right? Like, I hope that all of us, and through all this stuff, I don't talk much about my mother, and I was just thinking of what Lisa was saying. She led my life when I was really a real little kid, and something she always used to say. She wasn't really into like fate, but she would always say, if something happens in your life or there's something going on around you, that it's not about fate. It's just about, do you have the humility to stop and pause and really reflect and to think and to be present and to say, like, what's happening right now in terms of everything else. And I think this everything that's going on, I just, again, I'm taking a second just to absorb everything I just heard. But hopefully what we're saying is that we ain't going back, right? Like, we're moving forward, and we want to change it to be this whole other thing, right? Like, it used to be this other way, and we had this moment of pause and reflection, and now we're coming back and we're saying, look, it's going to be this whole other way now. And because it is, I think, for whatever it's worth, how my family, they've been trying to kill my people for a long time, talking millennia, they've been trying to kill us. And I'm chilling here with you all today. So I feel very energized. Anyway, all right, that was just my homage to everything I just heard, because that just took me a second. Look at I think a lot of the big challenge, I think we get caught up in the terms. We think about housing sometimes instead of thinking about homes and what it means to have a home, right? And when I think about this, people ask like what this is, and I'm old, like I said, I'm old Mexican Marine, veteran. So I think it's important that I talk about love a little bit, because I don't always get a chance to talk about it. But when people say, like, what does that mean? And I always think about, I ask people to stop for a second and think about the first time they fell in love, right? And it doesn't have to be with a person. It can be with like running or writing, or like I'm thinking about Tory with food and cooking. It can be reading. It can be doing all those things that make us human. That's the thing, right? It's not about the prehensile thumb. It's not about fire. The thing, creating something for the aesthetic, for the beauty, and to enjoy love, right? Like, what does that mean? And then to think about a place where somebody is and raising their family, the art of parenthood, and ask yourself, is that a place where you could imagine falling in love, right? And if you can't imagine yourself falling there, why would you want someone, what I'm saying? Just thinking about Malcolm X, the idea of being, he says, I'm the same man you think you are, right? And so if you couldn't imagine someone being in that space and falling in love, then maybe that's not a home. And so I think that, the state of housing, I mean, we need more. And I here at Commonwealth, we reclaim the concept of low income. I think when we think about what that means in terms of income distribution, who we're talking about are the people who take care of our children, the people who take care of our parents. This is the folks that we're thinking about with housing, in addition to everybody else. And in terms of creating housing for people, healthy housing where you could imagine falling in love, we haven't done so well. But and I think right now there's a huge challenge and some honest conversations that are happening when we talk about housing. Something I always ask people to say when they say that there is affordable housing is to ask that second part of that sentence, which is affordable for whom? Who can live in that housing? And so a lot of the housing we're creating, when we think about the people that we love in our communities, so our work here, we support a lot of small businesses. I think a lot about this and thinking about the folks that both Lisa and Tory are talking about that exist within their orbit. And we say, well, do we have a place for them to fall in love and to be in love in the communities that we live in? And if we don't, then we're lacking. And I think right now, we really should be thinking about a lot of this stuff. Like, if we need these folks and we need these orbits to be in our spaces, to leverage the asset of the talent and the beauty and the brilliance that they all bring, do we have the spaces for them to be, right? And do we have the spaces for them to have their families? Because it's such an integral part of who we are here, and it's such of the value of being here in Madison. And I would say that right now, you know, again, not trying to dwell on what was in the past, it's really thinking about the future. I don't think we've done it a lot. There's a lot of residual pain because of the land use decisions and the housing policies of before BP, before the pandemic. But I think there's a lot of folks right now, and you know, again, I'm inspired by everybody in their work that's thinking about how we do this going forward. But I think we need to be very deliberate when we're talking about creating housing, that we are talking about homes, and we are thinking about it as places where you could imagine falling in love, right? And having those spaces where people can fall in love in the place in the city that we live in.
Thanks. Justice, community is a significant determinant of health, love too. Would you, when we were prepping for this call, you shared a story that I'm hoping that you'll share here. Would you please share that story of community and resilience and how it's impacted you?
Yeah, you know, I will say brevity and concision are not my strong suit. So sometimes I get excited. So I don't know which story that was. No, I think I do know. This year we didn't have Commonwealth Development. It predates me. This place was opened up by a bunch of folks a long time ago, 42 years ago. So before, you know, it predates me. And I will say our gala every year is the Willie Street Fair, right? That's our thing. That's the thing we throw on every year here in Madison. I grew up going to this fair. My father is a musician here, a local musician, and there's pictures of me, you know, before I even knew it. But this year we couldn't have a fair, obviously, right? Like we can't have 13,000 people getting together. But Gary Callis from Wilmar Community Center, he had this idea. He was like, look, man, we can't just not have a fair. You know what I'm saying? Like even, so we got to do something. And so we had this idea. He had this idea. And he called it a bubble tour. And I didn't even know what that, I still don't exactly know what that means. But he was like, let's get some music and let's put it on flatbeds. And we're just gonna drive around these neighborhoods over here where you used to have the Willie Street Fair. And we're just gonna drive, you know, we're gonna go like 10 miles. We don't want any congregations, but we're just gonna stop by and we had, and I was the escort because you only could go like 5 miles. And I think I knew I didn't want a parade because I knew, you know, I was trying to support, I don't want people congregating. But all right, so I escorted, and it was the People's Brothers Band, and I encourage everybody to check them out. That was, but we were driving through these neighborhoods, and something that I saw, this is what I mean about the Madison spirit. It happened to be a really nice day here in September, and we're driving through the neighborhoods and watching people come out on their porches, and kids and families just in their porches and in their driveways come out and dance just for a minute. And just seeing that, we had a board member who said, you know, like, I didn't realize how bad my brain needed that. You know what I'm saying? And it goes back to that concept of love, but like just remembering to dance, right? And remembering to do those things that make us human. Even when we're in this situation, we're still out here dancing. And this is kind of what I go back to about the comment I made about them, you know, my ancestors and our ancestors have been dancing for a long time through all kinds of stuff, right? They've been trying to, you know, whether they were trying to massacre our people, whether they were, you know, we've been dancing, right? And kind of getting out here and hearing the music and then watching people dance, it was something to reckon with. So I think that was the story. But yeah, you know, so hopefully we're all remembering, right, to get out there and dance when we can, right?
Thank you. I think you just cued song for everyone later will James, your work has included demonstrations on how to address the adventure gap, such as the Black Men Northwoods Retreat. Will you talk with us about the adventure gap? What does it mean, and how can we all address it?
Sure. Well, I started my career in the outdoor recreation industry. You know, so working for a bunch of different companies, whether we're talking about makers of technical clothing or hiking boots or skis or et cetera. But one of the things that I noticed through the course of you know, a long career was that there were very few people who looked like me in natural places, whether we're talking about national parks or even, regional parks nearby. Now, we can, definitely see a lot of people of color in our urban parks, because I think that people of color really do love to spend time in the outdoors. But when we take a look at the big, broad representation of people in the outdoors, we have very few, relatively speaking, people of color. And so basically, if you take a look at that as a marker of disparity, not unlike the wealth gap or the technology gap or the economic gap, I mean, this is a disparity. I think a lot of people think, well, what difference does it make? I mean, isn't that something that we should worry about later on? Why do we need to worry about whether or not people go outside? I personally think for a couple of different reasons, we really have to address these issues directly, because nature is where we find our health. Nature is where our food comes from. Nature is where our fresh water and air come from. And if we have limited access to, big, broad, open areas of nature, how much longer will it be before we see the same disparities in local, regional access to nature? And specifically what I'm talking about is having access to fresh drinking water. There's a lot of communities in our country that don't have safe water to drink coming out of their taps. Also, it directly relates to having access to fresh fruits and vegetables coming from sustainably grown food on farms, that are nearby. And Tory alluded to, food deserts. And that's a very real thing. But also, I think more than anything else, it also speaks to the lack of disposable income and leisure time to be able to say to yourself, I'm going to go for a walk today. I'm going to get some fresh air and sunshine and exercise, and I'm going to experience my humanity by just going outside and being part of the creation of nature. And I think that especially when we start piling on other things that are more important, holding down a job, getting our kids to school, getting an education, all of these things push our own personal health and well-being to the back burner, and we neglect those things. And sadly, when we neglect those things for ourselves, we ultimately neglect them for our culture at large. So that we become infinitely more and more urbanized. We have less and less free time. We have less and less interest in, finding that quiet green space where we can just turn off our minds and relax and to be part of creation. And so much of what I do in terms of being able to make these connections is to, try to figure out how we can bridge the gap or cause the gap to shrink. And so one of the things that I did, through the COVID pandemic this summer was to work with my good friend Aaron Perry at the Rebalance Life Wellness Association to find and identify African-American men and their sons and take them from Milwaukee and Madison and introduce them to nature in a nearby national forest. And so we had to figure out what some of the disparities were that have prevented them from doing that. Again, part of it's leisure time. These men are hardworking family men who don't have the ability to take time off from work. So we figure out a way to provide them with a small stipend so that they can take the time off from work to come with us. We provided transportation, we provided food, but most importantly, we provided a safe environment. Because one of the other aspects of access to nature is, the historic negative implications of being a person of color and going into the woods. Much of the racial violence that was perpetrated by people of color in this country sadly happened in nature. And so, there's a long history in our country of being a person of color going to the woods and not coming out. So one of the things that was really important is that we created that safe environment where they could literally experience the outdoors in a very positive way. And part of it too was to also make sure that they were comfortable. It was an overnight experience, but we didn't require camping. We provided a safe but very comfortable indoor sleeping arrangement that allowed them to be able to get up in the morning and go for a long hike, to be able to have a nutritiously prepared meal and fresh water and guidance to be able to have this very positive experience. And I think that much of what we need to do is to create opportunities so that more people can do these things on a regular basis, so that we pay people a living wage, so that they don't have to work 2-3 jobs in order to put food on the table, so that they can have the leisure time to be able to experience nature in a positive way. And ultimately, I think most importantly is to be able to establish traditions of spending time in the outdoors. These are things that are handed down from mother to daughter, from father to son, uncles, cousins. We do these things as families, not just in the great outdoors in big national parks, but even in our local city parks. Going over to Tenney Park or Olbert Gardens or many of the wonderful lake shores that we have around Madison. I mean, these are the things that I ultimately want people to be able to see as part of their place in the world, and ultimately allow them to say, yes, I do have a place here. And hopefully over time, we'll cause that gap to shrink and ultimately make it so that everyone can feel safe in the outdoors.
Thanks. James, in what ways have you seen outdoor and adventure experiences affect how people see the connection between climate and health and equity, especially during the pandemic period?
Well, I think, personally, one of the things that I've noticed, I've been in Madison for almost 30 years. And when I first got here, it snowed every winter. And we had good skiable snow for making snowmen and to have long snowshoe walks and being able to experience nature in a very positive way in the wintertime. I think many of you will probably agree that we don't have winters like we had before very often anymore. And I really want people to recognize that the environments that we're living in right now aren't normal, and we need to make the very positive connection to your experience in the outdoors relative to the environment as a whole, and snowpack and availability of flowing water is one way to do that. And so, we take a look at like the Yahara River in Madison, for example, or the Milwaukee River in Milwaukee. Both of these rivers find their sources in national and state forests. So if we can do a better job of protecting and maintaining the forest near our cities, that's where our water's coming from. That's where our snow is going to be coming from. That water, that snow, that moisture, is part of being able to have a well-maintained and thriving economy that's not putting out so many fluorocarbons that we create these greenhouse gas effects that makes it warmer in winter and harder to have longer ranging things like a solid snowpack that makes sure that we have plenty of water so we don't have droughts. And so a big part of this is being able to see the direct connection between your interest in going for a hike along a river on a national scenic hiking trail and your ability to be able to put food on your table and have fresh water coming out of your tap, and realize that they are indeed connected. And we need to work collectively to be able to say, yes, we're going to have a safe natural environment, but also be able to have access to not only natural resources for our consumption, but also for our enjoyment and recreation.
James mentions snow. A question for all of the panelists. Popcorn, please, your responses. In our region, climate change will lead to more extreme temperatures and heavy rainfall too. The disparities in our community and systems will lead to disproportionate impacts of heat and rain on communities of color. How do you think this will connect with your areas of work? What are the challenges and opportunities?
I to speak for the chef community, it's like the growing seasons are changing, and what farmers can grow, like historically, they can't grow anymore, or they grow at different times of the year, and they don't grow as prolifically. People that are, and it's like, I get it. Like every year, it's the weather. The farmers love to talk about the weather, and they don't love to talk about it, but it's what they talk about. And it's one of those things that affects them so much. And, the food is ready when it's ready, or you can't plant it in the spring because it's muddy, and then you wonder why maybe that same farmer this year is charging $4 for radishes instead of $2 because they had 0 crops ready in the spring. So they weren't actually able to sell anything, or they had much less. And I think like that's the thing that you have to understand. And, from the food aspect, educating people on how much it costs to raise food, not just make it in a restaurant, not just like, well, this is what it costs to go out to eat in a restaurant. It's like I said earlier, it's a luxury. If you can afford to do it, then this is how much it costs. But the act of like growing food isn't just like, well, I planted a thing, or I bought a cow and I raised it, I milked that thing, and then I got, whatever, I made cheese. That there are so many things that can affect all that. And like I talk to farmers that are grass-fed, dairy-based cheesemakers, and they're like, yeah, like if there's only mud in the spring, normally we're making cheese by May, and now we're making cheese in June. What do you think you can do for a month with no money? Like that is a real like that. I mean, and that's like just one aspect of what climate change is doing to the farming industry and in turn to the restaurant industry, because then if you really are down to support people, then you're going to be paying $1, $2 extra a pound for things that normally you wouldn't be. And you just have to roll with that. And then you have to be able to, what am I supposed to do if I'm now paying $2 more for ground beef, say, like, am I not supposed to charge $2 more or like have that effect on my cheeseburgers? So cheeseburger's supposed to cost $12 no matter what with fries. Like, come on, so like that's the thing, everything is affecting everything. And I think people just have to get with that, or like get with the solutions of lowering their own impacts on the planet. So it's real. Science is real.
I'd add to that what Tory said, everything affects everything. So your question, how does this affect our work? Talking about climate change as just one facet of environmental justice is directly connected to health equity, Black women's health, everything Justice said, housing, economic development, everything James said about being outdoors, access to outdoors, safety outdoors. Once we're outdoors, are we safe? Is someone going to call the police because they see Black or brown people gathering, walking in places that they feel we don't belong? It's a crucial conversation that we really need to co-join very consciously. When we talk about health equity, we have to talk about climate change, racial equity, social justice. It's one conversation. That's what makes this panel so inspiring for me this morning, that you're taking the leadership to say that we can't talk about climate change and environmental justice separately from health equity, racial equity, wealth equity, because it's all part of a thing that has the same root cause, which I'm going to call it out as racism, racial inequality, structural inequality, and it goes back to the roots of our nation, of our world, of this dynamic of power, some people having more power, more authority in directing how natural resources are used and who owns, which is a strange term culturally to think of someone owning natural resources, but those are the dynamics that are really creating haves and have-nots. And so when we think about environmental justice and climate change, we have to talk about what we're talking about in the health equity arena is racism being the top public health threat. Racism is the top environmental threat, as well as a structural inequality. And until we talk about that, we're not going to be quite hitting the mark in how we solve climate change. We know right now that communities of color, everyone's affected by climate change, every single one of us. But Black, brown, indigenous, and poor people are more impacted because of infrastructure issues, lack of power and participation in the political process to shape how natural resources are accessed, owned, decisions around it. When areas flood, we're less likely to live in places where there's infrastructure to protect us from flooding. We saw what happened in New Orleans with Katrina. That's all tied to racial, social, economic, structural, systemic injustices, and it's climate and environmental in nature. And so we have to have this full-bodied conversation of how climate and environmental justice weaves through every single topic that we're talking about, whether it's food, housing, economic development, outdoors access. And I think we need to really focus on this for the next decade, is how we pull all of these things together and start with root causes, and to recenter people of color in this conversation like we are today amongst everyone, because this is endemic to our culture and our social, cultural, religious practices, how we care for the planet. I really am appreciative of Sustained Dane being conscious of the inclusivity piece, that there's Black, brown, white folks having these conversations in the context of this conference, because often Black and brown is stripped out of the conversation about sustainability. It's seen as a white conversation, a white male, white cultural conversation, and it isn't. It has its roots in Black, brown, and indigenous cultures. And now it belongs to all of us. And the solutions have to work for all of us and come from all of us, because it's impacting all of our lives, obviously, because we all live on this planet.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing so generously. You might have heard the buzzer already, and we want to make we're already short on time for questions from the group. But taking stock of the intersection of everything, and it being full-bodied, a term I fully intend to borrow going forward, Lisa. If you could, in 2 or 3 words, say what is driving each of you in 2021. Tory?
And I looked at this, and in 3 words, I the only thing that stuck with me was protect my family, you know, and do whatever it takes to protect what time I have with them, and honor the family base that I have with my wife and my 3 beautiful boys. And what that means is taking care of my business, taking care of my community, making sure that we have the time to and celebrate the time that we have. So like that's what was really driving me.
James?
3 words.
James, what will drive you in 2021? James is actually appearing frozen to me.
James a little frozen.
Lisa, will you take it?
Shifting power, changing the narrative.
Justice?
Oh, you got on mute.
Justice, I think you're on mute.
Tech stuff. No, I'm gonna cheat a little bit and use a contraction, and I'm just gonna say we're still here, right? And we're still here. You know, I think, and I mean that in all this stuff, we're still here, right? And I think about the folks that we're here with right now, and everybody here at this conference, and everyone who's doing this, and it's like, let's look around. Yes, whatever it is, it's the same as it's always been, though. You know what I'm saying? Like, everyone's gonna find out, you know, who we are when our back is on the back against the wall, but we're still here. And I think like I just, every time I get to listen to these folks talking, it just takes me away to a place. But but it is dire, you know what I'm saying? And I think about, like, we don't have the luxury of not leveraging these voices and of everything that we're talking about. And right now, in terms of everything going forward, the good news is that we're here, right? And we're here. And I think that is, you know, as long as we're listening to these folks and we're putting these stories and these narratives up in front, we're gonna be all right. It's gonna be rough, but we're gonna be all right.
James, welcome back. The question is a 2 to 3 word answer, and what's going to drive you in 2021?
Well, in 2 or 3 words, cautiously optimistic. You know, and it's remarkable. I had a chance to visit with my family here in Washington just last night, and my cousin is an Africanist with the State Department who basically in the last administration took early retirement because the circumstances were so bad. But having under the new administration, she's looking forward to doing the really important work of re-engaging with the African continent. And her husband, who's also a State Department employee, over dinner last night used the words cautiously optimistic. You know, we have the ability to make some really good, proactive, positive change right now worldwide. And I think we can focus those on individual communities like Madison. But we can't go back to business as usual. We can't go back to what we will call normal, because normal wasn't working for a lot of people. Okay, we need to do a really good job of moving forward. And as Justice said earlier at the very beginning of this call, we can't go back. There is no going back. There's only going forward. And I know that with people in this room, the people in our community, we've got the skills, the expertise, the strength, and the motivation to have some really good, positive, proactive change. And it's going to start right here.
Right. Thank you, everybody. We do have a couple of questions coming in, and I'm going to go off time script here a little bit to share them with you all. If you can all stay a few extra minutes, we'd greatly appreciate it. The first is for Justice. Do we need to do a better job of communicating what is affordable housing to the public? The public tends to think they know what it is, but as we know, it is a misunderstood term.
Absolutely, absolutely, and to everything again. In housing again, the home thing is also about our wages. It's also about the access to nature. I mean, a home. Everything that we're talking about in terms of access to healthcare, access to family care, access to the environment, all these things are part of a home. And I absolutely think we need to do that. And we need to be vocal, deliberate. We need to reclaim those concepts of what it means, what low-income housing means, that's not it's not in the pejorative, you know what I'm saying? But absolutely.
Great.
And it's not just about like having four walls to park every night, and
Right.
I think like that's the thing that people need to understand. It's like, yeah, well, you have access to affordable housing, but do you have access to a livelihood and to live in that house and to have a real, like you said, like to really be thriving in a home is what is providing is what providing low income housing and like having that access to that is. And I think like that's the thing that people don't understand. It's like, well, there's all this low income housing for who? And once you're in it, how are you living? Sorry.
Oh,
Oh, that's real. I mean, that's absolutely real.
That's so real. And as Justice and Tory said, if you have to work more than one job to afford your housing, the housing isn't affordable. That's the pattern that we're seeing in Dane County, particularly among Black and Brown women who are more heavily employed in the workforce than other women, contrary to public perception, who are working 2 and 3 jobs to afford rent in a place that is presumably affordable, but it's not affordable based on how wages are set and other factors that really shape how differently a dollar stretches for a family of color than a non-family of color because of other dynamics. And so we got to talk about all of these inequities around wealth and economics so that when we shape affordable housing, it really is affordable based on the scale that the community is really working with and not our formulas that we generate to create what seems publicly to be affordable, because it's not working here. We're in a housing crisis in Dane County that is monumental. And right now on the ground, families are destabilized at levels that our news stories aren't even really picking up. And this is pre-COVID, exacerbated by COVID. And it's alarming. It's alarming. Thank God for Commonwealth Development and others who are really trying to do innovative things to spur, new ways of thinking housing, of presenting housing, of providing housing, but we need their efforts to be quadrupled right now to just meet our local need.
Great. Thank you. There's a question for James. We've been interested in outdoor activities and access ever since we grew up in urban Southern California 50 years ago. Do you think technology, social media, computer gaming, etc., has affected time outdoors and interaction with nature in recent years?
Yeah, I would say yes. And I think that in many ways, it definitely has been negative, just in the sense that more people are inclined to spend more time indoors because our screens are better than they've ever been before. But on the plus side too, I think that with things like GPS navigation and low cost, high quality video and media production, we have the ability to spend more time outside in a meaningful way than ever before. We've got fitness apps, we've got social media as well as social networking platforms that allow people to share their experiences. You know, I mean, I personally, you know, my watch is constantly reminding me to stand up, you know, and go outside and do stuff, you know. And so I think that if the technology is used wisely, it can be a really effective tool to get more people in the outdoors.
Thank you. We are really at the end of our time together, although I know we could probably go on for the rest of the day and that there are many more questions that our Sustain Dane Summit attendees would like to ask. Hopefully we can do it again sometime. Thank you, each of you, for your generous sharing today and for being with us today. We are richer for it, and be well. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's been great.
Been a real honor. Thank you all.
Well,
Thank you.